Hello, everyone, and welcome to our latest Wealth Talk. Let me start with a brief introduction about the logistics, although you may be familiar with them from previous events. The talk will be in English, but you can listen to it in Spanish by clicking on the ES button in the menu above. And you can also submit questions for the speaker in writing by using the question comment button above also. La charla será en inglés, pero puede escucharse en español pulsando el botón del menú superior y eligiendo la opción ES Español. Si quieren enviar sus preguntas, pueden hacerlo a través del botón superior, pregunta, comentario. The recording of this Wealth Talk will be available on our Santander Private Banking.com global website in a few days. This is the beginning of a very special series of Wealth Talks being organized in partnership with Santander Universities through its global entrepreneurship initiative, Santander X. Santander X supports SMEs, startups, and micro-entrepreneurs, offering them training and connecting them with the resources they need to grow and prosper. This partnership and the support of ESADE Foundation led to the creation of Santander X Innovation Experts, an initiative to transform academic and analytical knowledge. This initiative supports innovation as a way to improve productivity and therefore employment and economic growth. And Santander Private Banking has a role in channeling and anticipating the innovations and identifying emerging opportunities in three broad areas: planet, society, and technology. And to begin this journey, we have Olivier de Weck, Apollo Program Professor of Aeronautics and Engineering System at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, which is most well known as MIT, where he heads the Engineering System Laboratory. His research deals mainly with system engineering, and especially how complex technological systems like satellites and aircrafts are designed and optimized and how they evolve over time. And he is also a member of the advisory board of Santander X Innovation Expert. This board met recently, and I had the honor of attending as a guest, and Oliver gave us a lot of insights about his broad experience as a professor and also in the private sector in McDonnell Douglas and Airbus. So with no further ado, let me introduce Olivier de Weck. Please, thank you very much for being here, Olivier, and for sharing all your knowledge.
Thank you, Juan. I just want to make sure that you can hear me well.
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, I would like to welcome all of you also on behalf of Banco Santander, Santander X. It's really fantastic to see a bank thinking so broadly about society, technology, the future of our planet, because everything is linked together. Juan and I talked a lot about how things are really connected these days. And what I want to share with you is my view on, the future of technology. And I will start doing this with, my own industry, which is aeronautics and astronautics. And so thank you again for having me. And why don't we start? And sure. I want to start with some very, very recent news. Actually, it is not even a week old. And I did spend 2 years at Airbus in Toulouse. I was Senior Vice President for Technology Planning and Road Mapping, thinking about the future. And this piece of news is very big. It's big geopolitically, but it's also big financially. So Airbus was awarded a contract for $37 billion by list prices. The actual prices are usually not divulged. So this is the list price for about 300 A320. These are the single aisle airplane, which has really been the most successful product. And by China, by 3 Chinese airlines. And so these will be delivered in future years. And it's a very, very big commercial success for Airbus. And so we can ask ourselves, why did this deal happen? Was it because Airbus offered a better price? Again, we don't know the official price, but my guess is no. Was it because better diplomacy? Because the relationship with China is complicated for many countries? Maybe. Was it because of better technology? My answer would be yes. And fundamentally, as you know, the A320 family competes with the Boeing 737, which had its first flight in 1967. So that platform is over 50 years old. The A320 actually had its first flight in 1987, but it's been upgraded since then. So it's at least 20 years more modern technology that's been upgraded. So the role of technology can be very large. The history, of course, of what we call the duopoly between Airbus and Boeing, this is for airplanes that are larger than 100 passengers, is a very interesting history. It goes back to the 1970s when Europe decided to create its own or consolidate its own aerospace industry to better compete with the US. And you can see the market share is about 50-50 now. Actually, Airbus has now slightly surpassed Boeing, but it started from zero in 1970. And as many of you know, it's 4 countries. So it's France, Germany, Spain is a very important partner, the United Kingdom, and more recently, the United States, Canada, and also China. It's really a global company. And so this history of achieving this large success took a lot of time and took a lot of effort, and it took a lot of investment. And so I want to go back a little bit in time to explain to you how impressive this evolution really has been. And usually I show this airplane here. This is the DC-3, so Douglas aircraft. By the way, I'm speaking to you from MIT. I'm on campus today in the Department of Aeronautics and Astronautics. And Donald Douglas, who was the head of the Douglas Aircraft Company that made this airplane here, was a student in our department in the 1920s. So he was in the building that I'm sitting in right now. And obviously, we're very proud of that. When you look at this airplane, it's a very cool configuration. You see, it's called the American Airlines. American Airlines is still around today. The flagship Sky Sleeper. So this airplane was made for overnight flights, mainly from the West Coast to the East Coast. Flying back then in the 30s was quite expensive. You know, only relatively wealthy people could afford it, like, you know, actors in Hollywood flying to New York back and forth. But the point here is that this airplane was the first one that allowed commercial aviation with paying passengers to be self-sustaining without government subsidy. Before then, the mail service, you know, carrying the mail with money received from the government was the only way that a commercial company could be successful. This airplane was good enough to be commercially viable on its own. And then we fast forward about 80 years to look at this airplane here. This is the newest airplane of Airbus, the A350-900, and then ULR stands for Ultra Long Range, entry into service 2018 with Singapore Airlines as the launch customer. This airplane flies the longest route in the world between Singapore and New York. And the other airline that flies really long distances is Qantas. It's the airline of Australia. And they had a challenge called Project Sunrise. Can you fly for 20 hours nonstop from, you know, the east coast of Australia, like Sydney, to London, to Europe, to Latin America, to other places around the world? And this competition was also won by the A350. So I don't want to be too technical, but you know,
we can compare the two, no?
We can compare the two, and you know, as an engineer, we like to go in the detail, and we, you know, Juan, you're in banking. You like to look at numbers, right? I like to look at numbers as well. Sometimes they're also financial numbers, but these are not financial numbers. They're more technical numbers, like entry into service, what year, the weight.
Looks like the second one is more profitable.
Well, yeah, because usually making things bigger, you get efficiency, economy of scale. And so we have a factor of 20 on the weight, about a factor of 20 more payload, about 10 times more passenger. The range is about a 10x, 12x. interestingly, so the wingspan, the size of the wing, is about 2x, not that different. Lift over drag ratio, finesse, how efficient aerodynamically, you see that the DC-3 was already quite efficient. And then the speed is about 3x.
The combination of all those improvements must be huge.
The combination is what matters here, exactly. And so I like to show this in a graphical way. And so you have on the y-axis the payload and number of passengers. We usually say PAX. It's sort of an acronym we use in aviation. 10, 100, 1,000. The range, this is how far can you fly without refueling. 1,000 kilometer, 5,000, 10,000, 20,000. And you see the DC-3 in the lower right and the A350 in the upper right. And we can multiply payload times range. And this is known as RPK, revenue passenger kilometers. So if we do the quick calculation, this is what we find, that the DC-3 in 1936 was able to carry 20 passengers over about 1,500 kilometers. That's about 30,000 RPK, revenue passenger kilometers. The A350 is able to carry about 170 over 18,000, 20,000 kilometers. That's about 3 million RPK, okay? So we take the ratio and we find an improvement factor of about 100, almost exactly 100 times better on this measure, on this figure of merit. So if we apply Moore's law, most of you or many of you have heard of Moore's law. It says that the original Moore's law said that the density of transistors on a chip doubles about every 18 months. So you can translate that into a annual percent improvement, and it's the same as a compound interest rate in the bank, right? If you put money in the bank, and I guess the interest rates have been very low or even negative in some countries, but let's say you get 5%.
Oh, no, investment in any industry and you get 5.8% efficiency improvement is, I can guarantee you, is a very good investment. So we need to find to see whether this rate of technological improvement can be continued. And that's the question that we have to ask you, can this be sustained?
Yes. So, well, of course, what I'm showing you here is a historical number, but it's a sustained average annual technological improvement of 5.8% over the last 82 years. And there is no sign of saturation. So my answer would be yes. However, sometimes we need to switch to a different technology. For example, you look, this is a propeller aircraft. It's driven by piston engines. So the piston engines, their progress saturated, right around World War II. And we couldn't have achieved 5.8% per year with piston engines because they reached some fundamental limit. So we switched to jet engine, as you see here, and then we get onto a new curve, a new S curve. And so it allows us to achieve 5.8% per year. And it looks like we will continue. There is no saturation as long as you're willing to switch to a different technology at the right time.
Okay, we'll talk about changes in technology at the end, because I have already received a question about the hydrogen and decarbonization, and I'll ask you if we have time to see what the future technological disruptions will need to be implemented in the airline industry. Technologies in the airline industry, you have explained very well all the factors, but technology is something very broad, no?
It is very broad, and we'll talk more about how to classify technologies, how to think about technologies in a broad but organized way. The last point I want to make before we go there is we talked about range and payload, right? So improvement on range and payload, but there's been many other improvements: safety, operational efficiency, also actually cash operating costs, right? That's a big deal. Like, how much does it cost you per passenger per kilometer? And then you mentioned decarbonization, which we'll talk about, which is the last point here on the right side, emissions. That is where the game is being played now and in the future. And so, you know, all of those 5.8%, that's just an average number. How did that happen? Well, it happened because there were very specific innovations, like first twin engine wide body. ETOPS means you can fly over water even with an engine out condition. The heavy use of composite materials for primary structure. The famous fly-by-wire flight controls. And you know, the Airbus airplanes are controlled with a stick, a side stick. Onboard information systems, full composite fuselage, and then the latest, the geared turbofan engine, so a new engine architecture. And then finally, this is more recent, that data science, so the ability for airlines to buy services to operate their fleet of airplanes more efficiently by collecting thousands of parameters during every flight, putting all this data into a big database, it's called a data lake, and then extracting insights like preventative maintenance. This is a service that Airbus is offering called Skywise. So we see a shift or an addition of new services that didn't exist before.
You certainly you worked there in Airbus, and you did a great job in helping them deal with the technology roadmap. And by the way, congratulations on your recently published book. And now we don't have time to discuss it, but for Airbus, for Europeans, is like a success story. Which my worry is now with Brexit and all this polarization, that all these initiatives we have collaborated successfully in the past, that we will not be able to do that in the future. But that's another topic for discussion.
Yes, of course. We will definitely come back to that point. So let's talk about technology more broadly. So you know, you'll find a lot of definitions of technology on the internet, in the dictionaries, but mostly they talk about applying science to problems. And I want it to be a little bit more precise. For me, technology is both knowledge, but also the deliberate creation of essentially artifacts, functional objects to solve very specific problems. And so you have to start with the problem in mind, not with the solution. So here's an example of different technologies on these pictures. And when you look at those pictures, it looks kind of random initially, but it's like a puzzle. And when we label the rows and columns, you see that it makes sense. So all of the columns are related to matter, energy, and information. And then the rows are transformation, so making something new out of ingredients, transporting, and storing. And it turns out this 3x3 grid to organize technologies is quite well known. It's quite well accepted in the literature. And so technologies that we looked at the transport, the airplane, well, that's transporting matter, like especially if it's cargo. And it helps us make what we call a functional taxonomy of technologies, to organize and group them in a logical fashion. And so let's look at the cell M1, matter transformation, and let's just look at an example. So in the book that Juan mentioned, we use a language called OPM, Object Process Methodology, to explain how things work, explain basic concepts. I'm a big fan of OPM. It comes from the Technion in Israel. Professor Dov Dori created it, and it's become an ISO standard now, ISO standard 19450 since 2015. So I use that a lot also in my classes at MIT. It helps you clear thinking, basically. So transforming matter is a process. A process is an oval. And then the objects are the inputs on the left, energy, different inputs, and the outputs on the right. And then you have enabling elements that are not being transformed themselves, but they're assisting, like a controller, a processor. And we also produce waste, or a catalyst sometimes. And OPM also produces language called object process language, which really helps you check the logic that is correct. So here's a specific example of an OPM model of steel making steel, a very old industry, an industry that is still extremely important, for construction, for automotive. So let's not ignore making steel. It's really still a very important industry. The question is, how do you make steel affordably, and how do you make steel with minimal environmental impact, carbon footprint, essentially? Because it takes oxygen. Some of the techniques use scrap steel, recycled steel. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about big trends. The circular economy is a big trend. More and more recycling, using not just primary materials, but recycled ones. And that's happening in steel production, particularly with a process called electric arc furnaces. And then we're producing steel, which is what the economic value is, but we also produce slag. We produce lots of carbon dioxide emissions traditionally. We need a furnace that has a capital cost, dollars per ton or euros per ton. And the production cost per ton, the productivity, tap to tap time, and so forth. And so we can measure the progress along these figures of merit. Now, the 3x3 matrix, I would say it's classic engineering, classic technology thinking. Recently, we had to expand our view because there's a lot of new technologies that have come about that we're now using. So I added here 2 columns. You see there's the 4th column, it's called value. Mm-hmm. And one, this is your world. We call that
blockchain there.
fintech, right? People refer to this as fintech, financial technology. So things like, cryptocurrencies. The SWIFT financial network was in the news because, the question was, should Russia now be excluded from the SWIFT financial network, as one of the responses to the war in Ukraine? It shows you how important that system.
No, that decision is going to bring a lot of consequences to the financial system. Absolutely.
So, and then blockchain, and so forth. So anyway, that column is financial technologies, which are relatively new. And then the last column on the right is also new, which is organisms. The thing that is being changed or manipulated by the technology is living organisms, including us humans, by the way. And that's generally referred to as biotech.
Messenger RNA vaccines are in that column, no?
Yes, they are. In fact, if you look in the lower right column, viral RNA, certainly the testing, and then the vaccines themselves, I would put them into the first row because we're actually transforming our immune system through the vaccination process. Anyway, the point here is that you need to think about technology broadly, and technology, people say, tech, they just say it's tech. Often people think just about information technology in the middle. It's much too narrow. Technology is much broader. It includes, agricultural, healthcare, financial, transportation, energy. All of those economic sectors fit relatively well into this 5x5 matrix. And, I've been doing this for a number of years, and I have not found a technology yet that cannot fit into this 5x5 classification. Now, sometimes technology can be in multiple fields, like the transport aircraft we just looked at, the A350. It transports cargo and humans, right? Living beings. That's why it shows up twice.
Mm-hmm. So the combination of all those improvements in that 5x5 matrix is what drives productivity and growth, no?
Absolutely. The point I will make in just a minute is that the rate of improvement, the interest rate, right, the capital growth rate in technology improvement is different, though. They're all improving, but they're all improving exponentially, but they're all improving at a different rate per year. That's important. So, talking about big changes, one of the biggest changes obviously has been the growth of the human population. When I was born in the late 60s, it was, I can point here. I don't know if you can see my pointer.
Yes.
it was around 3 billion or so, 4 billion humans. And now we're over 7. And there's an office in the United Nations their only job is predicting the evolution of the human population. And there are many different scenarios, but in general, there's a sense that after 2050, we probably will have some kind of slowing down of population growth, globally speaking, some kind of, I don't know if saturation is the right word, but around 10 to 11 billion, roughly in that ballpark. Most scenarios.
Yes, now we are growing at 1%. The global population is growing at 1%. It used to be 2%, and probably will go to 0 in the not so distant future.
Yeah, but it's going to take several decades. And of course, what is true is that the rates of growth of the population are quite different in different parts of the world. In some countries, actually, population is shrinking, like Japan, for example, right? And it's a combination of low birth rates, very low immigration. So that has a big impact on everything in society, including which technologies are important. You can also see on this chart several key milestones in technology. And so, it's only over the last 150 years that things, we had technological improvement for thousands of years, but the rate at which it's been happening has been unprecedented, especially over the last century. And 1 century is quite short if you think about, the 60 or 70,000 years that our species has been on this planet. So, Juan, you're absolutely right about the growth rate, about 1% now. And so a discrete version of this says that, the human population at time t is 1 plus r times the population at t minus 1. So typically we do this on an annual basis. And so the growth rate has been a little bit more than 1%, like 1.2% or so globally. And that's exponential growth. So we did mention this already, but this R, the technological rate of improvement per year, is really a critical number. And there's quite a bit of research, not just by me, but many colleagues around the world who study technological evolution and progress. And they have been able to estimate, quantify, bound these rates of progress per year. And what we're finding fairly consistently is that technologies that operate on matter, like making steel, aircraft transportation, storing fluids, things like that, they tend to improve in single digits, 2 to 4%, 6%, 5.5%. Those are very typical numbers. Basically things that are mechanisms, machines. And then in the middle column, we have energy technologies like photovoltaic. Solar cells are improving. They're still improving, but slightly below 1%. Electric transmission, 5.5%. Lithium ion batteries, which we're using a lot in electric cars and so forth, in our devices, right? We use lithium ion batteries. They're improving at about 5% per year. And then the third column is computing, information, radio communication, is improving much faster, 30, 40, 50, 60% per year. And that's been true for several decades. So
I was really impressed by the 65% in radio communications across space. That's what's going to be to make possible the exploration of Mars, no?
Well, that's true. We are already exploring Mars, but we're getting we're getting a lot of static images. I think the Mars helicopter Ingenuity, that's the first time we sort of got video.
I saw the statistic, like it takes like 7 minutes, no, for a high precision image to go from Mars to the Earth now.
Yeah, and I think with we're now going to optical communication with lasers. We'll be able to have real-time video from Mars, but the time delay is still 20 minutes because you can't change that.
You can change.
because the distance, right? Anyway, the question often is, why do information-based technologies improve so much faster than matter and energy? And it's kind of an active area of research, but the short answer is that matter and energy, if you change a component, you also need to change the neighboring components, because there's something called impedance matching. But in information technologies, you don't have to. You can send information one way, and you can improve each step without having to consider the upstream. And so that's, we think, the main reason why information technology improves more. And then I don't have the rates of improvement here for fintech and biotech. And the reason is that these technologies are so new that we don't yet have, you know, a 100-year history, or, you know, we have maybe a 10-year history or 20-year history. So those rates of improvement are still being researched. So let me switch to a slightly different topic, but it's related, which is that these improvements in technology don't happen automatically. I think we mentioned that. They happen because real people, like all of you listening here on this talk, are working on through projects, through investments, through innovation. And what we see is that it's never one person alone. It's never one company alone, one government alone. It's a whole ecosystem. So this is the picture you see here is also in the book. It's kind of specific to the United States, but I think in Spain or Mexico or any country or region you're going to have your own version of this picture, where the government is important for funding research in areas that are not yet commercially really viable. The universities are producing ideas, the workforce, also innovations, entrepreneurs, nonprofits, FFRDCs. This is a very US specific, it's a horrible acronym. I didn't create it, but it's called FFRDC, is Federally Funded Research and Development Center. Like JPL,
government funding.
Yeah, like the Jet Propulsion Lab that does, you know, the Mars rovers, they are an FFRDC. So it's a symbiotic relationship between different entities, and the investments that you're talking about, the investments, you know, Santander X, the whole enterprise that Santander is creating here is really there to understand how to create and sustain and improve these kind of ecosystems. So I just
all those parts that you mentioned are critical. So if one of them doesn't work properly, you don't get all the growth, all the technological growth that we see in certain parts of the globe where this ecosystem is working perfectly.
Yeah, that's true. That's absolutely true. And maybe different parts of the ecosystem are stronger or healthier, or there's a different balance in different countries. But fundamentally, you're absolutely right. You have to have these ingredients. I do want to make one point, which it took me a little while to really understand the difference, but there is a difference between a cluster and an ecosystem for innovation. So what is the difference? A cluster is an ensemble of what we just saw, universities, firms, startups. They're all in the same geographic proximity, typically close enough so you can drive there within at least a few hours. You can get there in, you know, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, less than half a day. That's typically the radius. But they're all working in the same field. That's what a cluster is. So I'll show you the picture of the Cambridge-Boston area life science cluster, which is really a strong one now, or Silicon Valley. That's the picture you see of the Bay Area. That's primarily around software, right, and computing. But then an ecosystem is a larger ensemble of institutions that are all working in different industries. So they're complementary to each other. And so in an ecosystem, you can have several clusters. I hope that's not too confusing, but there is a distinction. So here's an image of the Massachusetts Life Science Cluster. Probably the most famous, honestly, the most famous company out of all of this now post-pandemic is Moderna.
Moderna.
Right? Moderna is a spin-off of MIT and Harvard, and nobody knew Moderna 5 years ago, right? And now it's very well known. And so
no, I had the opportunity of doing a postgraduate course in MIT, and we saw about entrepreneurship, and we saw several startups, and that was very common to have like the finance guy coming from Harvard and the technology expert coming from MIT. So that ecosystem, I saw that in action.
Yeah, and you know, it's interesting because like if you had come in 1970 or so, that would have been non-existent, right? There was very little or no life sciences in Cambridge or Boston at all. It started around, you know, the hospitals, the teaching hospitals, Massachusetts General Hospital, you know, the Brigham and Women's Hospital, Beth Israel Hospital. You see them in purple at the top. You see the educational institutions at the bottom. You see on the left, you know, the different areas: health and beauty, surgery, medical equipment, dental, ophthalmic, which is for the eyes, diagnostic substances, even things like syringes and containers and kind of commodity things are important as well, analytical instruments. And then you have state institutions like Mass Medic, Mass Bio. They're nonprofits that are co-funded by the government to bring people together and enhance the dynamics of that cluster. And then you have specialized businesses in orange that are supporting the cluster: banking, accounting, legal services, venture capital firms, and angel networks. And then more like services, like, you know, laboratories for testing. So you can get a blood test done in 30 minutes instead of waiting 3 days. Those things all matter. And in fact, one of the most famous scholars in this area of clusters is Professor Michael Porter at Harvard, at the Harvard Business School. He's sort of developed over the years a theory why, you know, you can ask why now with the internet, you know, you can live and work anywhere you want in the world as long as you have good internet. Why do clusters still matter? Well, they matter because of the things shown on this chart. You know, some of your competitors are here. Employees are moving back and forth. You have good human resources, good natural resources, access to capital, but also you have sophisticated customers that are close to where you are. And the customers are not just buying your product or service, but they're giving you like real-time feedback, like, could you please add this feature? Or, you know, could you tweak the product slightly this way, because then we can use it in a new way. So this is all happening in these innovation clusters. And so if we look at R&D investment, you know, again, none of this happens without, you know, it's like, think about being a gardener or a farmer. You have to put seeds in the ground. You have to put water and fertilizer for these technologies. And the equivalent of, you know, water and fertilizer is R&D investment. R&D. So here's an analysis that was done by the European Union. This is 2019. I don't have the most recent data. You know, 2020 and 2021 was really kind of distorted by the pandemic, and I don't think we have really great data yet for 2020 and 2021. But this is 2,500 companies. So this is private investment by firms in 46 countries that are investing per year at least 30 million euros in R&D. And so it captures roughly 90% of the world's not government funded, but business funded R&D. And you see the circles here, you see sort of the distribution. There's another analysis which I think will interest many of you. This is done by the WIPO, which is the World Intellectual Property Office. Also 2019, what are the top 5 global economies or regions, either by region or by income group? And, you know, the United States and Canada continue to be investing heavily, but others are really catching up. So collectively, Europe is investing a lot. Then we have Korea, Singapore, Hong Kong, China, of course, Japan. And what I found interesting is, for those of you that are in Latin America and the Caribbean region, Chile, Costa Rica, Mexico, Uruguay, and Brazil, those 5 countries are listed number 5 in the world as a region. And so it's smaller than the US and Europe, but you can feel that there's something happening here, which seems very encouraging. Okay, so Juan, I don't know if you had any comments about this before I move to the last part.
No, you explained very well the importance of these innovation clusters in driving growth, because all these improvements they happening is not equally distributed. They is concentrated in certain areas, and that's the result of these ecosystems providing all this support for these initiatives.
That's right. But I guess my message is for those of you that don't live directly in one of those ecosystems now, like one of the big bubbles, if you live in like a smaller or mid-sized bubble, don't despair, don't give up. Even in smaller investments, if they're well targeted at the right innovations, can be extremely fruitful. Mm-hmm. So let's talk really now. It's like I'm going to talk really about the future and the far future. And some people that are predicting technological evolution are giving us a very scary message. And maybe they're right. I'm a little bit more optimistic than most of the futurists or technologists, but you probably heard about the singularity, technological singularity, and I just wanted to explain what that is. So simply said, the singularity is a hypothetical future point in time where technology can improve itself. So technology improves other technologies, and the growth is so fast, it becomes uncontrollable, irreversible, and will have fundamental changes for our human civilization. And generally speaking, this is associated with artificial intelligence. So imagine a computer program that initially is written by a human, but the computer program has the ability to rewrite itself and improve itself. Machine learning. So right now, machine learning is still done usually by humans, but machine learning that can improve itself without human intervention, right? And so that would turn these rates of improvement that we've seen, from 5%, 10%, 30%, it would make the rate of improvement itself exponential. So an exponent of an exponent, so to speak. And so one of the people that's written about this is Ray Kurzweil. He's also an MIT graduate. He's look at this curve here for computers. This is CPUs. And the figure of merit is calculations per second per $1,000. And so the annual rate of improvement is 37%. That's undisputed. And the question is, when will the singularity happen? So in Kurzweil's book, he says 2045. And so I did my own calculation and said, well, when will this surpass the human brain? And so you can reverse engineer Moore's law, right, using the 37%. And we get like 93 years starting in 1950. Why 1950? Because 1950 was the UNIVAC. One of the first kind of commercial big computers, right? It filled like a whole building or room at least. So if you use that math, I come up with 2043, which is very close to Kurzweil's prediction. And I didn't like cheat or anything. It just came out that way. So, okay, now, but wait, humans are not obsolete yet. There's a big difference between these computers that are shown here and us, our human brain. And the big difference is power efficiency, okay? The human brain contains about 86 billion neurons, an adult human brain, and consumes roughly 20 watts of power. And we're computing at about 1,000 petaflops. one of the best supercomputers in the world, this is the Chinese Tianhe 1A, it consumes 4 megawatts of power. That's why these supercomputers have to be cooled, right? That's why they're put close to rivers or lakes, because it requires so much cooling. So on this measure, humans are still unbeatable. We are about 6 orders of magnitude better than silicon-based computers in terms of efficiency, right? And we get our energy.
I like that message.
Well, no, it really gives you hope. And then you say, yeah, but you know, energy technologies also improve. I told you that, about 5% per year. Well, okay, so let's apply Moore's law again. And if you do that, it shows that it would take about 360 years from now, so roughly until the year 2400, for computing to be as efficient as the human biological brain. And if you notice, if we go back here, you know, it says optical, quantum, or DNA computing. Maybe at that point, we will have biological computers. We don't know. It's really an open question. Or we'll have photonic computers, you know, that use photons, or some combination, or obviously quantum computing. Another trend, which some of you might find scary, because it's often associated with the notion of cyborgs, is human augmentation with technology. But you know, the reality is that it's already happening.
It's already here.
It's already here at a massive scale. So even if you have contact lenses, even glasses, you know, I'm wearing these glasses right now. They're a little bit out of prescription. I've had them for like 10 years. I need to update them. But when I'm wearing these glasses, I'm a cyborg, right? The difference is I can remove them. And now everything is kind of fuzzy. But if you implant the technology in your body, small cameras and sensors, artificial heart, instrumented teeth, robotic hands, you're kind of bringing technology into your body, usually to make up for some deficiency, right? Or bring your level of performance up to normal, whatever normal means. But it's going to go much, much further in the future. And one of the big debates in bioethics is it ethical to bring technology so that we can exceed our baseline performance with these technologies? Is that something we should do, that we're allowed to do, that's ethical to do? It's one of the big open questions. And who can afford this? Who pays for these technologies? These are big questions. And, you know, this plus, you know, the great reduction in infant mortality has, of course, led to this incredible increase in life expectancy. And so people living to be 100 years or longer is absolutely becoming true. And it's also has fundamental consequences for everything in our society: knowledge creation and preservation, resource consumption, and technological adoption. And there's a chapter in my book, chapter 21, that talks specifically about the link between aging and technology. We also have to be humble. Many technologies, particularly in the 20th century, have had unexpected or unintended side effects. And I really like to compare these two lists that you see here. The one on the left is from 2003, US National Academy of Engineering, our proudest accomplishments of the 20th century as engineers, as technologists. And then on the right side, you see 5 years later, a different committee met and said, what are the grand challenges of this century? And I like to map, they didn't do this explicitly, but I kind of tried with the red arrows. Many of the grand challenges of the century are because of the unintended side effects of our successes of the 20th century.
Like cybersecurity and internet, no?
Cybersecurity, you know, the original TCP/IP, right, the internet protocol, had very little or no real cybersecurity built into it. And so now we're trying to kind of add it on after the fact. To show you with some pictures what that means here in Boston for urban development, it's actually quite encouraging. 1959, we were very proud. This is called the Central Artery. It's this highway that cuts through the city. But unintended consequence is it filled up very quickly. We still had congestion, and it like separated the city. It severed the social cohesion of the city. So with a huge investment of about $15 billion, a project we called the Big Dig, it was put underground, and they did not build new buildings, but they made a park out of it, as you see on the right side. And it's very popular, especially now in the summer. Another big trend, of course, is the physical versus the virtual world.
This is the metaverse?
The metaverse on the left, this is Facebook has become Meta. Mm-hmm. And then, even science fiction has this movie Ready Player One. If you haven't seen it, it's I don't know whether to call it scary, but it's really a question mark of how much time are we individually and as a society going to spend in the physical world versus the virtual world, and will the two drift apart, or will the two support each other? It's a big open question. And so to finish up, because I know we want to have some discussion, is where are we headed, as a civilization? There are many dystopian futures, technology takes over, robots takes over, humans become obsolete, and so forth. But I do think there are also utopian futures where, things will get better eventually. For example, Professor Wilson at Harvard wrote a book called Half Earth, where he proposed that half the surface of the Earth, not literally half like shown on this cartoon, but you account all of the national parks and wildlife reserves and marine reserves, about half the surface of the Earth should be left untouched. And this would allow biodiversity to really flourish again. What is
lots
the
of
next
questions about the future and about the consequences of technological improvement. Now we're going to discuss this for a long time.
Absolutely. And I do not claim to have the answer, but I think we can sort of point to some likely scenarios maybe. So you've all heard of Industry 4.0, which is fundamentally, what is Industry 4.0? Cyber-physical, it means machines talking to other machines, to each other, to perform some functions autonomously with no or only minimal human intervention. Fundamentally, that's what it is. We talked briefly about genetics and biological engineering, and in particular CRISPR, the ability to do precise gene editing, quantum technologies, and again, it's an open question as to what, all of those are happening actually in parallel, and maybe it's not right to just pick one of them and say the future is Industry 4.0, because all of those trends are happening in parallel. So anyway, while we cannot predict the future, we can attempt at least to bound it. And, I think a very favorable scenario going to the end of this century, which again, you think, 2100 is a long time away, but a child born today in 2022, right, is going to be 78 years old in the year 2100. So if you recently had a child, and that child lives healthy and doesn't have any accidents or misfortune, the likelihood that that child will still live in the year 2100 is very high.
Very high.
So what we want is a stable population, fully renewable energy sources, closed cycles, biodiversity maintained or even restored, and fundamentally a world in a kind of equilibrium. Unfavorable means we have continued and unabated population growth, climate change unabated, growing inequities nationally and worldwide, mass starvations, wars. And when I showed this slide 5 years ago, and somebody said, well, wars are over now. Well, unfortunately, as we're seeing, they're not. And eventually a collapse of our civilization. And if you don't think this is possible, I encourage you to read the books by Jared Diamond, who studied past populations, on islands and that have collapsed. And the difference is we're all connected now. So it's difficult to imagine that one, part of the human population would collapse, but not the other, because we're so connected. So the work, Juan, that you're doing with Santander, the investments, creating healthy communities, healthy economies, I think is very important to make the favorable outcome more likely.
More likely.
And with that, I'm going to stop here. So if you find this interesting, you want to read more about it, my new book just came out literally last week. I just got my first hard copy this morning. So the timing is really good. And here's a QR code. If you want to take a picture with your smartphone, it should lead you to the Springer website if you're interested to learn more. And with that, Juan, I'm happy to discuss or answer any questions.
Thank you, Olivier. Definitely, we need to understand all these technological implications in order to work on the favorable outcome for our descendants that are going to live beyond year 2100. So we have some questions. A lot of them are related to aerospace and aeronautics. One is related to drone usage and the swarming drone intelligence and its application to commercial aviation, and also, unfortunately, to military spending, which is an unfortunate event of this year.
Yes,
they need to spend more on defense.
Well, so that's right. So specifically drones, I think, drones, they're also referred to as unmanned aerial flying vehicles, UAVs. They've been around for several decades, but what's new is that, they used to be very large, heavy, and expensive. Now we can even make drones that are so small, like an insect, like a fly. And some colleagues of mine here at MIT are working on really very, very capable small insect-like drones. And like any technology, it can have very positive uses for society, commercial applications, like inspecting power lines, for example. This is very dangerous work, right? If you have to go and inspect power lines or pipelines that are in remote regions, it's not really fun work. It's dangerous. You have to climb, on trees. You can fall down. So drones are fantastic for this work. Bringing a small sensor like a camera, an infrared imager out into the field and getting you a lot of information. I also believe that package delivery, not for big packages, but small packages into neighborhoods, maybe not in the city center, but in the sort of suburban regions or remote regions, delivery of medication, on real-time delivery of medication, drones can really do a fantastic job for that. But they need to be regulated, they need to be safe, and we need to qualify them properly.
Question from, I think it's a client in Latin America, because it's relating to the problems of big cities like Mexico, DF, Sao Paulo being congested, and how could the eVTOLs, the electric vertical takeoff and landing, new vehicles can solve all this congestion.
So, I like eVTOL. So it's like vertical takeoff and landing. So you can take off from roofs directly, right? And so you can save a lot of time, instead of being stuck in traffic for 2 hours, with cars and jam, you can fly to the airport in 10 minutes, 15 minutes and avoid that. And Latin America, Sao Paulo in particular, Mexico City, there have been trial services with traditional helicopters. It's really a great market for that. But let's be honest with ourselves. The number of persons that can be transported in this way who can afford it is pretty small. We're talking about, I don't know, a few hundred flights per day. And I did some simulations on this. You can do a few hundred, a few thousand people, but in many cities, millions of people are moving to
You don't solve the problem, no?
Do not actually solve the problem. The only way to solve the problem is through ground transportation. Better subway, better buses, electric bikes, walking more, creating safer streets and safer neighborhoods, which means better economy for everybody. That's how we solve the problem. So I wouldn't call eVTOL a gimmick, but honestly speaking, it will be a significant market, I think. But again, just for an elite initially.
It's not going to be like the electric scooters that we find all around the city right now.
No. So the scooters, I think the e-scooters will help more than the eVTOL. My colleagues at Airbus probably wouldn't like me saying this, but I'm just being honest.
Oh, talking about Airbus, there's a question about A380. Why it wasn't a commercial success?
Well, you know, I would say about a month or two ago, I would have told you that it wasn't a commercial success because the assumption behind the A380 was that we weren't going to build new airports, that everything was going to be hub and spoke. The reality is people like to fly direct, even between medium-sized cities, right? Like even here in Boston now, we can have A380s, but we have a lot of A350 flying to Doha, flying to, you know, Madrid, flying to Latin America. So Boston is not a huge city. So people don't like hubs and they don't like to switch planes. That being said, I don't know if you saw recently in the news, Lufthansa is bringing its fleet of A380s, which it had sort of like almost mothballed, bring them back. Because now, after the pandemic, travel demand is so high. People want to get out. They want to travel again for business, to see family, to go on vacation. There is so much demand. And you know the staffing shortages, right? The staffing shortages in many industries. So an A380 can transport 400, 500, 600 people in one flight. So it's very efficient, from a staffing perspective, even though it's not that fuel efficient. But that's the main reason it's coming back.
Talking about fuel efficiency, there's a question about decarbonization and how the need to achieve net zero emissions is going to be achieved in the airline industry, and whether hydrogen is the answer. But
there are two competing thoughts right now. The one is that the primary mechanism will be so-called sustainable aviation fuel. So it's fuel that's made with, say, algae or synthetic fuels, not pumping oil and gas out of the ground, but using synthetic fuels, and or biofuel essentially, because then, you know, you take the carbon from nature, you put it back. It's not negative, but it's at least neutral. The other, and then Boeing is really pushing sustainable aviation fuels. Airbus is really pushing hydrogen and exploring it very seriously because, you know, hydrogen is the ultimate clean fuel, right? The only emissions from a hydrogen aircraft is water vapor. And don't forget, the most important source of energy on our planet is our sun. And what is the fuel in our sun? It's hydrogen.
Definitely. But we need to progress on renewable energy in order to have green hydrogen. So we still have a lot of work to do in arriving to that level of efficiency in producing hydrogen. Another question regarding the implications of the geopolitical crisis that we are suffering. Seems like we are going into a fragmented world with China and Russia on one side, and the ability to share technology is going to be more challenging in the future. And for example, initiatives like the International Space Station they seem to be quite difficult to put in place going forward. What is your view about that?
That's very true, and it's very unfortunate. You know, I'm really hoping that you know, the lessons of World War II, when the United Nations were created, you know, a lot of international bodies for harmonization, collaboration, and so forth, they don't seem to be valued as much these days, including, by the way, here by many in the US, which is unfortunate. And I think we're headed to a world where maybe at a regional scale, self-sufficiency for food, for energy, is going to become more important. So as you're thinking about investments in transportation infrastructure, agriculture, energy, information systems, you always have to keep in your mind, what if this line gets cut? What if this line gets cut? What if this port is closed? Can I still function? Can I still operate? So you have to think about investing in technologies and infrastructures that have much more flexibility in them to respond to where the future is going. I'm hoping that cooler heads will prevail, that eventually, because honestly speaking, the new generation of, when I look at students, I'm a professor, so my main job is to teach young people, help them learn, help them become, adults and professionals. When I look at today's young generation, it gives me a lot of hope, because I do not believe that they want this kind of fragmented world.
Definitely.
And so I'm very hopeful that when they come to power, which will take a while, that things won't be too bad, and that we can really kind of reunite this world.
I think the slide that you showed us before with the favorable outcome for year 2100, I think we can finish with this picture with the blue planet, which is the hopeful scenario, and you are Swiss, so we don't want to we want to be punctuality is important, and we have I just wanted to thank you so much for all the information, all the knowledge, all your academic findings and experience, and for your positive message about how we can the future generations, if we really work on improving things, in collaborating and working on the favorable environment, and cooler heads prevail, we have a bright future. And so thank you so much, Olivier.
Thank you, Juan. Thank you for all of you to listen, and all the best to you.
Thank you. Well, thanks everyone. And as we said, this Wealth Talk will be available in our website in a few days. And thank you to Santander X for this great initiative of the Santander X Innovation Board.